The girls were in their early 20s. Alicia had a main group of friends consisting of 6 girls, including herself, all in their early 20s. According to Alicia, they used to go to the movies, watch TV series on streaming platforms, and talk about their daily lives, among other things. I should have realized something was wrong earlier, but I have a habit of seeing things too positively. To better understand the situation, here's the context. At the beginning of November, Alicia told me that her friends were starting to go out without her. She tried to make plans, but they always fell through because her friends said they had overestimated the time they had to hang out. Although it sounded concerning, I wasn't willing to believe that friends of 5 years would leave her out for no reason. When I discussed it with her, I told her it was probably just a coincidence. Then she told me that her friends continued responding to posts on TikTok and Instagram, as well as direct messages. It seemed to me that she was overthinking, and when I told her that, she let out a sigh of relief. Everything seemed fine. Alicia had a group chat with her friends. On January 14th, she told me the group chat had been silent all day, which she said was unusual. The last of her messages to which her friends responded had been sent the morning of the previous day, January 13th. All private messages about the chat were ignored. I didn't know what to tell her. Then she told me she had tried to make plans with Sarah, but it turned out she was busy. She went to Sarah's Instagram page where there was a new IG story. She tapped on the story and what appeared was a picture of her 5 friends sitting together, holding wine glasses and laughing. Alicia buried her hands in her face and groaned. I empathized with her because I knew how distressing social anxiety could be. That feeling is terrible and overwhelming. All I could do was tell her to wait. It didn't help that no one responded to private messages about the group chat. It really didn't help when, as the weeks passed, the chat remained empty. At the beginning of February, I was at a bar when I ran into Jessica, one of Alicia's friends. I asked her about the group chat, why it was empty, why it had been empty for weeks. We have nothing to say there, she told me. That's when I noticed she had Snapchat open on her phone. There was an active group chat called Main Friends GC. I pointed to the phone and then asked if Alicia was part of it. No, it would be annoying for her, she said, turning her attention back to her phone, leaving me confused but with something to tell Alicia. When I told her, she said her friends could have at least told her about the new chat. I agreed. I was heartbroken to see all of this happening to a good friend of mine, so this is what I told her. I'm going to tell them they need to include you more if they're really your friends. This is what I regret saying, not because of what it means, but because of the situation it would put me in over the next few months. I would hear Alicia cry every time I asked her what was going on. It was always that she saw photos and videos on social media of her friends going out without even mentioning her or tagging her. Eventually, this interaction occurred. Alicia opened the comment section under Sarah's latest post. She scrolled down and her eyes widened. Where's my comment? Did she delete it? I wanted to assure her it was probably a glitch. But at that point it was obvious her friends were leaving her out and refusing to comment on her absence. Alicia went to Jessica's account and then navigated to the comment section of her latest post. She scrolled through a few comments and then gasped. I left like 3 comments on this post. Then she checked the comment section under Leah's latest post, the same. Anna's latest post, the same. After checking Sandra's latest post, she told me it was the same. Her friends had deleted all her comments. She groaned. I can't take this anymore. I was frustrated for her. From what I've been told, her friends' accounts are all private and don't accept random follow requests. I had Alicia try to organize a sleepover with them. She messaged each of her friends and then we waited. To my surprise, Alicia told me they responded with plans for a sleepover at Sarah's house the following Saturday at 9 p.m. At 8 p.m. on Saturday night, Alicia told me she received a message from Sarah that said, Sorry, Alicia, we're going to have to cancel the sleepover. I'm really busy right now. How about we try another time? I cringed at the excuse and that suggestion, knowing how fake they were. It hit like bricks, and I wasn't even experiencing this firsthand. Alicia and I left the house carrying only our wallets and keys. We weren't going to commit to anything anyone wanted to commit to, but this would end tonight. Around 8:30 we arrived at Sarah's door. I knocked and then took a deep breath. Sarah opened the door. Her eyes widened as they rested on Alicia. Wait a second. Sarah turned away, but I wasn't going to wait another second for this to end. No, we need to talk to you right now. Don't ignore us. I know you like doing that now, but you can't. Sarah turned to face me. You shouldn't be here, especially you, Alicia. Alicia frowned. Why are you doing this to me? I don't want to cry anymore. Just tell me why you're not responding to my messages and why there's a new group chat you didn't tell me about. Do you want to still be friends with me? Just tell me. Sarah frowned. You know what, Alicia? My friends and I are not obligated to hang out with you, so leave us alone. That was the kind of mediocre excuse I expected. I pointed at her. Maybe you should be honest with her. Don't maintain a friendship if you don't want it. No one needs to be emotionally tormented. Maybe she deserves people who actually care about her and won't leave her out. What did she do to you anyway? Sarah looked me in the eyes. You're not welcome here. I don't know why Alicia brought you here, but it's not going to change anything. Determined to get answers, I stepped toward her, but Alicia told me we should leave. I looked at her. We need answers. No, we should leave. You're right, I shouldn't be around toxic people. This is too much for me. Alicia turned to the street and walked down the path. I couldn't argue with what she said, so I followed her. We walked down the sidewalk in silence. I struggled to process how stupid this situation was. As we walked, I heard murmurs from a couple of familiar voices. I looked back and saw 5 people walking a few feet behind me. I took it as a coincidence. This group was just minding their own business, right? Then I heard Leah's name mentioned in Sarah's voice. I leaned toward Alicia's ear. I think your friends are following us. I looked back again. The girls were now walking fast. They sped up under the light of a street lamp, revealing a terrifying sight. They were wearing masks made of gray towels, and each of them carried 2 hammers, all pointed at us. My heart sank into my chest, and then I focused on the sidewalk in front of me and ran. Alicia ran beside me, her expression one of absolute terror. We turned left onto another road, avoiding every streetlight so we wouldn't be seen. I was tempted to look back, but I wasn't willing to. We turned left again and then right. At some point I looked back, there were no girls. Alicia had also stopped and was practically on her knees. She was trembling, hoping we had lost them. Eventually we kept running. By the time we got back to my house, my legs were about to break. Before returning, I had called the police and made an arrangement with Alicia to hide at my place since her friends didn't know where I lived. We hurried inside. I locked both doors and then closed every curtain while Alicia turned off all the lights. Right now I'm exhausted and trembling to the point that all I can do is breathe. I barely want to move, but I might jump at every knock or even something that sounds like one. I'm not willing to tell you the room where Alicia and I are hiding. I hope this ends soon. The police are on their way, so we should be fine, right? Unless the girls get here before the police and do something to us. We didn't get answers, and honestly, I don't feel like we will. But maybe that will change someday. That's all I wanted right now, though we are in need of help. Update. My friend was being ignored and left out by her main group of friends. I regret trying to get answers. I was trembling, worried about the idea that the girls might break in at any moment. Eventually, the police arrived and told us they would be on alert, which relieved most of my nerves. Alicia and I still needed to hide, and for how long was unknown. A couple of hours after the police left, there was a knock on the front door. A male voice echoed inside. Hello, we've secured the property. Can I come in? I approached the door and opened it, relieved that help had returned. The officer stood on my doormat with his radio in hand. I took a deep breath. Thank you so much for coming. Can you stay for a while? Yes, I'll stay because the description of the perpetrators is quite alarming. I've brought reinforcements. I ran to Alicia's room and repeated what the officer had told me. She sighed in relief, but she still had that look of conflict and stress on her face. No matter how much we had talked about her friends, I was still confused about why they hated her. She hadn't done anything wrong as far as I knew. This situation was so out of the ordinary. She had always been quite innocent and sweet, so who would act against her as if she had done something criminal? The officer was at the kitchen table talking on his radio, while Alicia and I went over the things she had done that her friends might have interpreted as malicious. We couldn't find a single thing that would lead someone to chase another person with hammers. Who would be so upset by someone who can't hear them, misreads a text message, or looks in the wrong place at the wrong time? Eventually, the officer approached us and told us to follow him outside. We put on our shoes and went out. The 3 of us were mostly silent as we walked down the sidewalk. It was a warm, quiet night, so silent that I could only hear the sound of our footsteps. At some point, we entered a convenience store. The cashier was absent and there were some candy wrappers scattered on the floor. The officer led us down one of the aisles and looked us in the eyes. Do you hear the music playing? That will be your lesson for tonight. It was a rap song about trust. I didn't understand what it had to do with the situation. I didn't understand how what the officer said was supposed to fit with the atmosphere of this situation. Before I could open my mouth, I heard the front doors. The officer looked and then walked away from us. 5 girls entered, all wearing towel masks and carrying hammers. My heart sank. The girls stood together, their left hands resting on their hips while they all looked at Alicia and me. Alicia gasped. "Oh my God." The officer let out a good laugh right in our faces. I raised my right eyebrow at him. "Why are you laughing right now?" The girls started laughing, but not in an innocent way. The officer shook his head. "Did you two really think you were safe with me?" I was confused. Why would a police officer say that? What did he mean? What was he doing? The girl on the far left pointed her hammer at the officer, laughing. "He's my boyfriend." The officer took off his hat and dropped it to the floor. "I need to get out of these clothes. See you later, Sandra." It was as if my soul turned to ice. All those feelings of safety and trust were just the result of a ruse. How did they do it? What happened to the police we called? Our safety wasn't real. I looked at Alicia, whose eyes had shrunk and appeared less colorful, as if life had been drained from her. "Why? What are you doing?" Sandra rolled her eyes. "We got you to come here to trap you. Did you have fun feeling safe?" Sandra's boyfriend walked toward the doors. The girls stepped aside to let him out. I frowned. "Whose idea was this? This is cruel and you shouldn't be doing this." Sarah, shifting her weight to her right leg, pointed her hammer at herself. "Mine, actually." The girls rushed toward Alicia and me, their brows furrowed and their hammers pointed at us. I grabbed Alicia's shoulder and then turned and ran to the back of the store with her. There was a door, but the handle wouldn't budge. My nerves were tense. The next thing I knew, unbearable pain struck my back and shoulders. The force of multiple hammer strikes knocked me to the ground. Then, one of them struck my right knee. The pain was unbearable. I reached for my knee and let out a scream. Leah grabbed my hands and held them above my head. Then Sarah and Sandra struck my kneecaps again, making me scream louder than I ever had before. They then started scraping my waist with the front of their hammers. Meanwhile, Alicia was crying and screaming. Jessica and Anna didn't hold back, striking every heavy part of her body once before scraping her forehead. I could barely do anything other than kick and cry. The only thought in my mind was why. Then they struck my head, and everything went blurry. Sometime later, I woke up in an empty room with white brick walls and a metal door without a window. My body ached from the blows it had received, and I was confused about where I was. Hours passed and nothing happened. All I had were my thoughts. Eventually, I fell asleep and woke up to a plate with 3 slices of steak next to me. It was cold, but I was hungry and had nothing else to do. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I was given more cold steak meals and my legs hurt less. Although the hammer blows were painful, I must admit they weren't very strong. I can only assume it was more of an intimidation thing than torture. However, it was still quite painful. Another hour must have passed before the door creaked open. It was Sarah, without her mask, her face and long blonde hair fully visible. She was holding a jar in her hands as she looked me in the eyes. "I brought this. Have fun with it." She pointed the jar at me and then twisted the lid, closing her eyes. She tipped the jar over, dropping a blurry object to the floor. It looked strange, as if something could get a sensor blur in real life. As I stared at it, my heart sank. Chills ran down my spine and my head began to ache. Sarah backed away and left the room, closing the door behind her. What made this worse was the click of the door locking. I stood up, staring at the blurry object as it lay on the concrete floor. I needed to get out. I stood up, ignoring the pain, and threw myself against the door. I twisted the handle, hoping I could somehow yank it off. Of course, it was to no avail. Fear really affects your confidence, doesn't it? I was hyperventilating, but then I wondered, why was I so scared of this? It was an object, it couldn't move. I sat facing the door. I wasn't going to look at that disgusting thing. I hated it so much. It was as if its purpose was to increase my fight-or-flight response, specifically the flight part. I reached into my pocket, searching for my phone. When I took it out, I noticed the screen was horribly scratched and cracked. It had LOL written on it in eyeliner. All I could do was throw it at the object, but I would need to look at the object to aim properly. I buried my head in my arms, hoping to fall asleep. Well, I did fall asleep, but I woke up to a painful sting in my left shoulder, as if hundreds of needles were pricking me at once. I looked and saw the blurry object up close. It just sat on my shoulder until it moved. Shocked to my core, I stood up and slammed my shoulder against the wall. The thing fell and landed by my foot. I reached to grab my phone and then blindly threw it at the thing while turning my head. The phone made a thud instead of a smack, so I must have hit the thing. As I caught my breath, the painful sting returned near the center of my back. With a tight stomach, I took off my shirt and threw it to the floor. Fortunately, it was covering the object, but I could see a lump moving. I became disoriented and vomited on the floor. I had felt enough fear for long enough to frustrate me. In a desperate need to rid myself of the thing, I took my right foot and stomped on the lump over and over. I heard a squish. Once I felt I had crushed the thing, I stopped. I crouched and gently lifted my shirt until I saw a repulsive mass of black, red, and purple along with some white slime. As disgusting as it was, my adrenaline wasn't spiking. However, my shirt was torn and covered in gross stains. The door clicked and opened. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, hoping it wasn't one of Alicia's twisted friends. It was only Alicia with a pale face and sunken eyes. Her shirt was torn, exposing her stomach and shoulders. She let out a deep sigh. "What did they do to you?" I explained everything. She nodded and then squinted. "They made me eat one." I almost vomited again. "They made you what?" "Yes, Sarah and Sandra tied me up, and then Sarah put a tube in my mouth and... I can't even..." I was desperate to know why Alicia's friends were doing this, going to the greatest lengths possible to torment Alicia and me. If they did anything else, I didn't know what it could be. Did they do anything else? They sat far away from me and talked about all the fun things they've done together, along with all the fun things they plan to do. I tried talking to them, but they barely responded. Then apparently Sarah stole my childhood DVD and brought it with her. She got up and scratched it against the wall while the others laughed and stared at me. That's cruel. They're horrible people. The worst part was that they were no longer wearing their towel masks. It was like a casual gathering I wasn't invited to. Did they even mention their issue with you in passing? No, but they would occasionally mention my name and say you, or make a disgusted face. Alicia didn't deserve to go through all of this. I wanted to find out what the problem was with her fake friends. And even if Alicia did something wrong, one, she would be the one to apologize and make it right. I doubt she did it on purpose. Two, her friends were definitely wrong for being violent, impersonating authorities, and kidnapping. Why can't people just communicate, or at least say they don't want to communicate? I told Alicia we needed to stay away from her psychotic excuse for friends. She nodded in agreement. Definitely, though I think one of them was neutral. Neutral means you don't care what the toxic person does. You don't want to cut them off because you don't see what they're doing is wrong. Alicia nodded in agreement when a woman with long black hair who appeared to be in her 30s peeked into the room. "Oh my God, are you two okay? I'm an employee here. I heard there were 5 girls causing trouble." Alicia looked at her. "Yes, they made me eat a weird bug and socially humiliated me." The employee nodded. "I see, I'm going to need you to come with me." We followed the employee down the hallway. I couldn't guess where we were. The hallway was just white bricks and gray metal doors along both walls. It didn't help that I couldn't remember how I got here. Every question Alicia and I asked was ignored, which meant I would have to wait longer to get answers. It couldn't be that long, right? At the end of the hallway, there were a pair of double doors. The employee held one of them open for us, and as we passed, I felt a pit in my stomach. The 5 psychopaths were standing together in the center of an empty lobby, pointing their phones at us. Sarah rested her left hand on her hip. "Hey, look, it's those losers." Sandra flipped her long black hair back. "They're so gross." I looked at the employee, expecting her to call them out. I hoped she would even curse at them. She nodded her head from side to side. These 2 girls were trespassing on this property and touching male employees without their consent. "What?" "Yeah, what you heard." If my trust and sense of safety hadn't already been destroyed, I looked at Alicia to see her reaction. Her brows were furrowed. "I know everything about you, by the way. We've been friends for 8 years. Jessica laughed. "Oh yeah, we know everything about you too. We still have that video of you being tricked into scratching someone's car by telling you it was a junk car you could practice your rage on." The girls laughed. Alicia had a determined look. Meanwhile, I was trembling. What was about to happen? Did Alicia have to say that right now? Sarah looked me in the eyes. "Alexa, you shouldn't be friends with Alicia if you don't want to get into her problems. I frowned. But you're the ones causing the problems. You're torturing us and not giving us any reason. The girls put their phones in their pockets and then walked toward me. I was cornered, and even if there weren't 6 women cornering me, the exit doors were boarded up beyond their frames. There was no immediate way out. Sarah was staring me down. You know what, Alexa? I was sinking. What? Sarah and Sandra quickly approached me and grabbed my arms. I froze, remembering what happened in the convenience store. Jessica smiled. I think we should let Alexa say whatever she wants now. Sarah laughed. I bet she thinks people will believe her about the bug. Sandra laughed. That's why we presented her with the bug. The employee handed me her phone and then told me to vocalize every word I wrote. As I wrote this, the girls laughed and rolled their eyes at every moment of fear I recounted. They want me to feel small, but I'm already too distrustful of them. Hopefully this will be resolved peacefully and maturely. It happened while I was working as a pizza delivery driver. One night, while making a delivery to a house, I witnessed something so disturbing that it made me never want to deliver pizzas again. From a young age, trouble had a way of finding me. I often hung out with bad influences, leading me to make horrible and often reckless decisions. My illegal activities frequently brushed up against the law, and numerous close calls only fed my misguided sense of invincibility, until one night when my so-called friends and I made a big mistake. The sky was a bruised purple, punctured with a million tiny diamonds, as my friends and I, fueled by beer and the persistent buzz of marijuana, huddled in my neighbor's garage around a single flickering light bulb. After sneaking inside, the air was filled with the metallic smell of oil, and the distant hum of the fridge sounded like a low heartbeat. We had squeezed through a crack in the fence, the rough wood scratching our skin, and settled in a circle in my neighbor's garage as if it were our place. My parents were away on a weekend trip, mistakenly assuming I was responsible enough to stay out of trouble. My friends and I lit up a big joint, the acrid smoke stinging my throat as I took a deep drag, feeling like a cartoon dragon exhaling a dense cloud that lingered thick and stagnant in the still air. Whether it was the smoke or just bad luck, I lost my balance and stumbled backward, causing a toolbox to crash to the ground with a deafening clatter. A puddle of spilled solvent, previously unnoticed in the dim light, glistened ominously. The metal tools clattered against it, and a spark ignited a tiny flash that turned into a monstrous flame in an instant. Panic spread faster than the growing fire. My friends, faces filled with fear, ran past me, leaving me alone with the spreading flames. My lungs screamed for fresh air, a desperate gasp trapped in my smoke-filled chest. With a surge of adrenaline, I ignored the searing heat and flung open the garage door. There stood Mr. Smith, my neighbor, his furious gaze cutting through the disarray of his bathrobe. Without a word, he grabbed me by the neck and threw me onto the damp grass. Then he ran for a fire extinguisher, his face set with grim determination, desperately trying to save what was left of his burning garage. Mr. Smith, his face flushed with anger and the smell of scorched fabric clinging to his robe, barked into his phone, reporting the fire and our trespass to the police. Sirens wailed in the distance, a rising sound that mirrored the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. The police arrived quickly. My friends, eager to save their own skins, wasted no time in pointing accusing fingers at me. From a legal perspective, the situation looked grim. The authorities, their faces stern under the harsh glare of the patrol car lights, classified my accidental fire as a criminal offense. The lack of intent mattered little in the face of the evidence. Trespassing, the remains of the joint, and the smoldering ruins of the garage painted a clear picture. The combination of our poor decisions, trespassing, smoking marijuana, and the resulting fire left no room for leniency in the eyes of the law. The judge, a stern woman, pronounced my fate: 4 months in juvenile detention. Those months became a forced period of introspection, a monotonous battle against regret within cold, sterile walls, an oppressive silence, the clang of metal doors and the hollow thud of footsteps echoing in my descent. A month before completing my 4-month sentence, the court granted me parole under the agreement that I would pay for the costs of repairing Mr. Smith's garage. Every penny I earned over the next year went toward that repayment, a constant reminder etched in money and trust. The weight of my past clung to me like wet clothes, and I trudged forward, one paycheck at a time. The air in the house was heavy, thick with the unspoken weight of my mistake. Mom sat next to me, her hands trembling slightly as she navigated a sea of job offers in the flickering glow of the monitor. I knew she was angry, devastated even, but beneath the anger, I saw love, a silent plea for me to understand the gravity of my actions. Dad, ever pragmatic, sat across from us, a frown on his usually jovial face. Unlike Mom, his silence felt accusatory, a heavy weight that spoke volumes. The night dragged on, marked by the constant tapping of the keyboard. An hour later, we found a job offer that seemed promising: pizza delivery driver. It wasn't the dream job I had hoped for, but it was a start. My parents felt the shift too. They exchanged a look. Mom's face lit up with hope, and Dad almost smiled. Mom, a wordsmith, polished my resume, transforming it from a jumbled mess into a presentable document. Dad, seasoned by his own job interviews, coached me on how to conduct myself during an interview, his stern questions a tough but essential practice. In that moment, their tacit support spoke louder than any words. A week later, I found myself outside Luigi's Loafs, its peeling red sign over the entrance. The air was thick with the classic aroma of an old pizzeria, a blend of strong tomato, melting cheese, and the sizzle of pepperoni. In one corner, stacks of flour-dusted boxes teetered, and the walls, adorned with faded posters, depicted cartoon chefs tossing heaps of ingredients with exaggerated enthusiasm. The gruff man who emerged from behind a swinging kitchen door was not the polished interviewer I had imagined. A flour-covered apron clung to him like a second skin, and his voice boomed with a roughness that could rival a foghorn. Desperation drowned any initial apprehension. I needed this chance. The interview itself was refreshingly brief and straightforward. He didn't probe into my past, didn't ask about the fire still smoldering in my conscience. Instead, he focused on the essentials: age, driver's license, and the seemingly impossible task of balancing a steaming pizza and a temperamental GPS. It wasn't much, but at that moment it felt like everything. The job itself wasn't a walk in the park, but it wasn't a disaster zone either. There were long periods of inactivity with the occasional avalanche of orders that left me breathless and drenched in sweat. The base pay was a joke, barely enough to cover a week's worth of ramen noodles. Thankfully, there were tips. Those crisp bills slipped into sweaty palms or jingling at the bottom of the delivery bag were my salvation. Every penny went directly to Mr. Smith, a constant reminder of the debt hanging over my head. But the real challenge wasn't the physical demands or the meager pay, it was the customers. In theory, the job seemed simple: deliver hot pizza, collect payment, smile politely. Reality, however, was a completely different beast. Some people were friendly, genuinely happy to see a pizza arrive at their door. But others, well, let's just say they could test the patience of a saint. A simple wrong turn or slight delay could turn into a verbal storm. I endured doors slammed in my face with enough force to rattle my teeth, accusations of stolen sodas with the indignation of a wronged king, and even faced some people demanding free pizzas for both real and imagined inconveniences. Those moments made me question the very essence of humanity, leaving me wondering if kindness was an extinct species. One night on the job, the clock on the wall mocked me with its glowing green digits that seemed to say, "Almost there." Midnight had just struck, and the promise of freedom, a bed, a shower, anything but another delivery was near. Just as I was about to turn off the radio to enjoy the silence of a closing shift, my boss's voice crackled through the air. "One more delivery," he announced. I swallowed a sigh that threatened to become a full-blown groan. 2 steaming pizzas were shoved into my arms, the cardboard boxes radiating a comforting warmth that instantly clashed with my dwindling patience. A greasy note stuck to the top contained the address written in messy handwriting and the phone number for the delivery, which seemed to have more digits than usual. A glance at the GPS confirmed my suspicions. This delivery was far beyond the usual pizza radius, deep in the heart of the quiet countryside. With a resigned sigh, I entered the address into the GPS, muttering a prayer to the technology gods for a decent route. The glowing screen pulsed with a suggestion, and the cheerful voice announced a shortcut that promised a quicker route. Creek Road, or some variation of it, appeared on the screen, a name that conjured images of peaceful fields and maybe a friendly cow or two. On that side of town, streetlights gave way to a blanket of darkness and the occasional twinkling star. Deciding which detour was the right one for Creek Road became a guessing game. The dense woods pressed in on both sides, their whispering leaves creating a symphony of soft sounds. Every twist and turn of the road made me second-guess myself. Was I heading in the right direction? Was I lost with a car full of rapidly cooling pizza? In a final effort, I pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder of the dark road, the headlights casting long shadows that danced on the uneven ground. Grabbing the greasy note, I dialed the phone number written on it. Silence stretched out with the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the background, hidden in the grass at the roadside. Just as I was about to hang up, defeated, a deep voice crackled through the receiver. It was low and deep, but oddly tinged with a soft accent. Hello? Relief washed over me like a wave. Hi, I'm the pizza delivery guy, I blurted out, my voice a bit higher than usual. I'm having a little trouble finding your house. Another moment of silence followed. Then the man on the other end chuckled softly. Don't worry, son, he said with a warm accent. My driveway's easy to miss. It looks more like a dirt path than anything else. He then described the surroundings, his voice painting a picture with words. He mentioned a large oak tree with a tire swing hanging from a low branch and a rusty mailbox shaped like a red pickup truck. With renewed hope, I hung up the phone and gripped the steering wheel tighter, cautiously turning onto the narrow dirt path. I navigated slowly, the headlights slicing through the darkness like twin spotlights. Dust rose behind the car, creating a misty cloud that momentarily obscured the path ahead. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 30 seconds, a single-story house emerged from the gloom. It looked like a ranch-style home painted a warm yellow that seemed to glow slightly in the dark. A single light flickered in the window, casting a cozy rectangle of golden light onto the porch. Holding the 2 steaming pizzas, the cardboard boxes felt pleasantly warm against my palms. I crunched along the gravel path toward the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked with my knuckles on the weathered wood, the sound echoing hollowly in the still night air. Muffled music, something old from the 1900s by the sound of it, filtered through from inside the house. Footsteps shuffled toward the door, a slow and deliberate rhythm that sent a shiver down my spine. The footsteps stopped abruptly. A moment of silence followed, then the door creaked open, revealing only a sliver of darkness inside. A man peered from behind the door, his face hidden in the shadow. The man behind the door seemed to be using it deliberately as a shield, his body concealed from view. Hi, I stammered, the sudden silence thick and heavy. Pizza delivery, right? Yes, that's me, murmured the voice instantly recognizable from our phone call. An awkward silence descended once more, the old raspy music from another time providing the only distraction. Desperate to break the tension, I blurted out, Do you have the money ready? Yes, just hold on a second, he murmured. His voice warmed despite the strange tension in the air. He shuffled away, the music momentarily replaced by the soft creaking of floorboards. A gentle breeze pushed the door open wider, a sliver of light illuminating the interior, revealing a glimpse of a cluttered living room. However, the visual revelation was quickly overshadowed by a wave of putrid smell that hit me like a brick in the face. The stench was unmistakable, a sickly, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn and my eyes water. It was the smell of death, and it instantly eclipsed the old music playing from inside the house and the man's friendly demeanor. Seconds stretched into a dense, uncomfortable silence. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, the sound of the crickets outside growing louder in the absence of any other noise. This was getting ridiculous. This entire delivery had been strange. With a growing sense of unease, I knocked again on the open door. Sir? My voice sounded tense even to my own ears. A muffled response came from somewhere deeper in the house. Could you come to the kitchen, please? The request struck me as so odd, so out of place that I blinked, momentarily convinced I had misheard him. Could you repeat that? I asked, needing confirmation. Could you come to the kitchen, please? He repeated, his voice a bit more insistent this time, a touch of urgency that made me shudder. My instinct flared. This wasn't in the training manual. My boss had taught us to never enter a customer's house for safety and liability reasons. But in that moment, sensible judgment took a back seat to a misplaced sense of, well, I wasn't sure what to call it, maybe a misplaced need to help. Against the persistent voice of caution in my head, I found myself shrugging nonchalantly. I cautiously stepped into the house, the aged floorboards groaning under my weight like the protests of a reluctant spirit. It wasn't just old. This house was a time capsule, every detail frozen in a snapshot of a bygone era. The house was thick with the smell of dust and echoes of the past. The long, narrow interior stretched before me like a dimly lit tunnel, Darkened hallways with shadow-wrapped thresholds branched off to the left and right, like forgotten rooms in a labyrinth. The faded wallpaper, clinging precariously to the walls, displayed a floral pattern in dusty pinks and tarnished golds. A design straight out of a 1930s dream, faded with the passage of time. In the corner, a tall grandfather clock stood like a sentinel, its ornate mahogany frame gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the ajar door. Its solemn presence was punctuated by the rhythmic ticking of its pendulum, a steady heartbeat in the silent house. Next to it, an old record player crackled to life, its needle whispering across the surface of a dusty vinyl record. A hauntingly beautiful melody drifted from the speakers, a forgotten song from a lost time. To my right, an open door offered a tantalizing glimpse into the kitchen. An old cast-iron stove, its black belly worn down to a dull gray by countless meals, stood proudly against the far wall. Flickers of firelight danced on its weathered enamel surface, hinting at a pot bubbling on its burner. A porcelain sink, its white surface now yellowed and etched with age, was nestled beneath a small window framed by lace curtains more yellowed than white. The man's voice, warm and slightly rough, called from somewhere within the kitchen, but I couldn't see him. Turning my head to the left, a narrow hallway stretched out before me, its right side lined with closed doors. At the far end, a faint and flickering light cast an eerie glow on an old woman dancing in the hallway. She was completely naked, her back to me, swaying and slowly dancing to the rhythm of the 1900s music playing on the record player in the living room. She was touching herself. I don't mean she looked safe or anything like that. I mean she was literally touching her body in a disturbingly erratic way. Her movements were slow, almost dreamlike, as she swayed to the music filtering from the living room. It wasn't a sensual dance, but rather an erratic exploration of her own body. Her arms moved and her hands fluttered, tracing lines along her skin in a way that sent a jolt of discomfort through me. In my time as a pizza delivery driver, I'd seen my fair share of eccentrics. A naked lady dancing to old music might sound funny to someone else, but what I was witnessing transcended humor. It was deeply unsettling how she moved with such a disconnect from the music, lost in a world of her own. Terror coiled in my gut as I tore my gaze away from the disturbing scene in the hallway. Nervously, I directed my gaze back toward the kitchen, catching sight of the man, or at least what he allowed me to see. He peeked around the corner, his face obscured by the wall, his body hidden. It was him again, but only part of his face was visible, one eye staring at me with an unnerving intensity that made me shiver. My mind went blank. All I could manage was a desperate question that came out in a strangled whisper. "Do you have the money?" The man's response was not what I expected. Instead of words, a sound emerged from the hidden man's figure, a guttural, deep laugh that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth. It wasn't a laugh, not in any traditional sense. It was a vibration, deep and chilling, that resonated in my bones and made the hairs on my neck stand on end. It was the sound of something primal, something lurking just beneath the surface of normalcy. Then, with sudden and terrifying abruptness, the horrid laughter was cut short. "Get him, Mom." The words burst from the man's mouth, shattering the silence with a force that made me flinch. The volume and raw aggression were a shocking contrast to his previous monotone, soft voice. It was as if a switch had been flipped, revealing a hidden fury beneath the calm exterior. My blood ran cold as the full weight of his words sank in. From the hallway to my left, a sound tore through the air, the sound of rapid footsteps approaching. I turned my head just in time to see the naked woman, the one who had been dancing moments before, running toward me. Her speed defied her age, driven by a terrifying urgency. Pure terror washed over me, a rush of adrenaline that propelled me to act without thinking. I spun on my heels, the pizza boxes forgotten as they crashed to the floor. The door, the only escape, seemed miles away. My legs pumped with an instinctive urge to flee, overriding any thoughts of dignity. I flung the door open, the hinges creaking in protest, and practically threw myself across the threshold. Reaching the car, I fumbled with the key, cursing my trembling hands. The door swung open and I practically hurled myself into the driver's seat, slamming it shut with another bone-rattling bang. In an instant, the engine roared to life, its sound a beautiful symphony against the terrifying silence behind me. My foot slammed on the accelerator and the car shot forward, tires kicking up gravel as I sped away from the driveway. As I drove off, the house rapidly shrank in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't resist one last look back. Bathed in the pale light of the moon spilling through the open door, I saw them. The man and, apparently, his mother, both completely naked, their forms stark and unsettling against the dark interior. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but the intensity of their stares seemed to pierce through the distance, following me even as I put more and more space between us. Whatever was happening in that house, it was far from normal. I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that their intentions were anything but innocent. It certainly wasn't about the pizza. Whatever secrets that house held, whatever abnormal dynamic existed between the man and his mother, I knew it was something I wanted no part of. I returned to work a few days later, the encounter in that house replaying in my mind on an endless loop. Sharing my story with my coworkers was a mistake. Most of them laughed, just as I had expected. "A naked old lady chased you? That's hilarious," they joked, their laughter feeling hollow and insensitive, like a swarm of angry bees buzzing in my ears. Frustrated and shaken, I stormed into my boss's office, expressing my desire to quit. He was aware of the court-ordered agreement and tried to persuade me to stay, saying, "If you don't work to pay off your neighbor's garage, you'll end up back in juvie," he warned. The thought of juvenile detention didn't carry the same weight as it once had, not compared to what I had seen in that house. "I don't care," I snapped. "I'd rather go back than keep working here." 4 weeks later, I finally landed a job at a local diner. The pay was decent, but after the court fees and the court-ordered agreement to pay for my neighbor's garage, every cent counted. One night, during a late shift, the diner wrapped me in its usual sensory tapestry. The sizzle of burgers on the grill, the dance of staff weaving between customers, the symphony of cutlery and dishes from the kitchen. As I wiped down a table marked by ketchup stains and abandoned fries, my phone vibrated against my leg. I pulled it out and answered the call with a curious, "Hello?" Silence. Then shallow, tense breaths filled the receiver. Normally I would have hung up by now, but something about this felt vaguely familiar. The sound of music playing faintly in the background of the static-filled call. I knew I had heard that music before, but I couldn't quite place it. I listened closely, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized it was the same song, that old raspy melody from the early 1900s, playing faintly in the background, the exact same song I had heard in that house. Chills ran down my spine as I stood frozen, the diner around me fading into the background. The memory of that night flooded back in vivid detail. The dark, creepy house, the unsettling interactions, the horrifying chase. It was all connected, and the realization made my blood run cold. "Hello?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling with fear. The breathing on the other end of the line grew heavier, more deliberate, as if whoever was on the other side wanted me to hear every exhale, every inhale. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat forming on my forehead. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the call ended. The silence that followed was deafening, leaving me standing there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring blankly ahead. I wanted to believe it was just a prank-a-sick joke played by someone with a twisted sense of humor, but deep down, I knew better. I quickly put the phone back in my pocket, my mind racing. Was I being followed? Was someone watching me? The thought alone was enough to make me glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man or his mother lurking in the shadows of the diner. But there was no one. Just the usual late-night crowd, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside me. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every noise, every movement in my peripheral vision made my pulse quicken, my paranoia growing by the minute. I tried to focus on my work, on the mundane tasks that usually kept my mind busy, but it was no use. The fear had burrowed deep inside me, and it wasn't going to let go. By the time my shift ended, I was a bundle of nerves. I practically ran to my car, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. The second I got in and locked the doors, I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But as I started the engine, a nagging thought crept into my mind. What if this wasn't over? What if they weren't done with me yet? The drive home was a blur, my thoughts consumed by the possibilities of what could happen next. Every car that passed me on the road, every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. It wasn't until I pulled into my driveway, the familiar sight of my house coming into view, that I allowed myself a small sigh of relief. But even then, as I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, the feeling of unease lingered. I knew I wasn't safe. Not really. Not after what I had seen, what I had experienced. And as I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, sleep eluding me, I realized that no matter how much time passed, I would never forget that house, that night, or the chilling voice that had just called me. Established in 1908 by Theodore Roosevelt, the Big South Trail is a 12-mile hiking route that winds through the rugged area of Comanche Peak before reaching Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. Experienced hikers have described the Big South Trail as moderately difficult, but as one noted, there are sections where the ledges are only 24.5 inches wide, which can be really challenging, and if you're not in shape, it can wear you out pretty quickly. Known for its scenic beauty, the trail is also a wildlife haven and home to elk, bobcats, black bears, and mountain lions, to name a few. Average temperatures on the trail range from highs in the upper 60s during summer to frigid lows of 10 to 15 degrees in winter, making it perfect for both sunny and snowy outdoor activities. The natural and wild beauty of the area was partly what motivated brothers Alan and Arlen Atadero to found the Poudre River Resort, a place where hikers and outdoor enthusiasts of all kinds could enjoy their favorite hobby. Alan mentioned that he and his brothers spent so much time there that they felt they were becoming part of the landscape. So in the end, it made sense to move their families there. Life at the resort was relatively peaceful until the fall of 1999, when a group of Christian singles was helping Alan prepare for the winter in exchange for free lodging. On October 2nd, the group of singles decided they wanted to visit a nearby trout farm, just under 2 miles from the resort itself. Alan knew several members of the singles group well, and since his 6-year-old daughter Jocelyn wanted to join them, he knew he couldn't give her permission without her 3-year-old brother Jared wanting to go along. So, trusting the singles group, Alan gave them permission to take his children with them on their hike. Around 10 that morning, excited to be on one of his first real outdoor adventures, Jared ran ahead of the group, but no more than about 105 feet before his guardians in the singles group called him back. Around 11:30, the group stopped to talk to some fishermen whom their little explorer had met while he was ahead, and after a brief conversation, they continued along the trail. By then, the group had begun to separate or spread out as they walked, with some moving faster and others slower, with at least one adult staying with Jared's sister and Jared, who continuously ran ahead of everyone else. Shortly after, little Jared rounded a bend in the trail and disappeared from view. Technically, he wasn't further ahead than usual, so his guardians didn't worry too much. But when they too rounded the bend, there was no sign of him with the small beige coat he was wearing. One of the singles group members hurried ahead to try to find the child, but there was no trace of him, and it turned out that the last image of young Jared rounding that blind corner on the trail was the last time anyone would see him alive. In the following days, a massive search and rescue operation was launched, but not a single sign of Jared Atadero was found. In fact, it would take nearly 4 years to find any clue of his demise, but these clues seemed only to raise more questions than they answered. After searching for about an hour, some members of the hiking group returned to the Poudre River Resort to give Alan the bad news that his 3-year-old son had gone missing in the woods. Panicked, Alan immediately drove to meet the rest of the group and helped them continue the search for another hour or so. During this time, some of the 11 members of the hiking group reported hearing some kind of high-pitched scream, including Alan's 6-year-old daughter, Jocelyn. I asked her what kind of scream it was, whether it sounded like someone was being attacked or playing with someone. Alan later said, she said it sounded like a playful scream, like someone was playing tag with him. Since it seemed that Jared was within earshot, the group continued to search intensively, but no matter how hard they tried, they simply couldn't locate the missing boy. So just before 4 that afternoon, Alan ran back to the resort to call 911. Less than 30 minutes later, Larimer County Emergency Services Specialist Bill Nelson received an emergency page alerting him that a child had gone missing on the Big South Trail. Bill in turn contacted his search and rescue manager, who immediately mobilized several SR teams to prepare for a large but delicate operation. Within 2 hours of the original search and the 911 personnel's arrival, there were boots on the ground at the lower access to the Big South Trail, with a total of 65 people involved in the search for Jared. An hour and a half into their search, rescue personnel had covered most of the trail and still had not located Jared. As a result, the operations area was greatly expanded with reinforcements, including Air Force helicopters that would arrive the following morning at 7. On October 2, 1999, a UH-1N Huey helicopter based in Cheyenne made its first pass over the Big South Trail and remained the search and rescue team's eye in the sky until late in the morning. After returning to Fort Collins Loveland Municipal Airport to refuel, the helicopter arrived back at the search area around 3:30 that afternoon. However, during its second patrol over the trail, the helicopter struggled with mountain conditions and stalled, plummeting more than 100 feet before crashing through the pine canopy near the trail's access point. On board the Huey were 4 USAF service members, as well as a representative of the Larimer County Search and Rescue Team named Mark Sheets. When it crashed, Mark was the only passenger not secured in a seat, as he was on the floor with the door open. He said that when he saw the blades strike the tops of the trees and pieces of the helicopter scattering through the forest, he hurried to close the door, but a loose tree branch found its way into the hold and struck the Air Force medic on board directly in the face, fracturing the medic's eye socket and causing blood to gush from an open wound. By some stroke of luck, the Air Force crew was able to escape the wreckage of the helicopter, but Mark Sheets had been completely knocked out and was still trapped in the crumpled mass of metal that was still in danger of exploding. Search and rescue members rushed to the downed helicopter, broke a window, and managed to pull the unconscious Sheets out before he could suffer further injury, but he still sustained a severe concussion and an L-shaped 13-inch wound that left his femur exposed. Mark also suffered 3 broken vertebrae in his lower back and a broken shoulder, possibly from being pulled out of the wreckage so violently. The helicopter crash definitely delayed the search, but fortunately everyone survived, and the search efforts continued into the 3rd day. The 3rd day saw the arrival of specially trained police dive teams who explored the deep pools of the nearby Poudre River. Another helicopter was sent to assist in the search, but it encountered swirling winds that required full power to avoid crashing. This quickly consumed the helicopter's fuel supplies, and it was soon forced to return to Fort Collins Air Base. Over the next 3 days, well-meaning but poorly equipped volunteers began harassing the Larimer County Sheriff's Office and the Larimer County Search and Rescue Team to allow them to help. Little Jared had been missing for almost a week at that point, and time was running out to find him safe. They approved, and soon the number of search and rescue personnel had swelled to over 200 and included a dozen dog teams, professional trackers, a dive team, and a search plane. But even with all those bodies and assets, the search and rescue operation was a complete and utter failure. Not a single usable clue was found regarding Jared's whereabouts. Consequently, officials were forced to notify the Atadero family that the search for Jared had been suspended. Larimer County Undersheriff Bill Nelson hastily convened a press conference in which he told the gathered journalists, "We worked 8 solid days to start with, and that was 24 hours a day for 8 days. We did some night searching. It was limited to a certain extent, but we always had people in the field making noise, so if anyone was out there, now Jared would have heard it. Maybe he would have responded." Jane Schmiefsky, a member of the Larimer County Search and Rescue K-9 unit, said the search was one of the most intense she had ever participated in. She had never been involved in the search for a child before, and while it was expected, she was amazed by the level of media coverage. "It became a real national episode," she said, "so that put a lot of pressure on us and a lot of pressure on the dogs." Larimer County Sheriff Justin Smith was only a low-ranking sergeant in 1999 when Jared disappeared. He said the helicopter crash was an extremely stressful event that definitely had a negative impact on a crucial period of the search, and that the intense media interest only exacerbated the situation. It should be noted that all this occurred right around the time when the grand jury in the John Bennett Ramsey case was about to issue indictments, so the concept of children in danger was very present in the national imagination. Naturally, the media flocked to feed the public's appetite for answers, and at one point, 17 television satellite trucks lined Colorado Highway 14, and the area was swarming with reporters and camera crews bundled in fur coats to ward off the bitter Colorado cold. Meanwhile, police tip lines were flooded with calls, including a number of self-proclaimed psychics who claimed to know where SR operators could find the terrified but still alive Jared. TV crews watched as a Native American medicine man visited the area and informed them that he had come to perform some sort of ritual in which he would ask the mountain to return the child to his parents. And in a particularly unusual but wholesome incident, a barefoot man with a mule appeared on the trail and volunteered in the search effort. But no matter how sincere the gesture, The dog teams and aircraft had found no sign of Jared, so a couple more pairs of eyes on the ground proved of little use. Although it pained them to do so, the rescue volunteers were forced to completely suspend their search. For years, the case of little Jared's disappearance remained a complete and utter mystery. That was until June 2003, when hikers Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts were visiting the Big South Trail. Rob noted that they had chosen Poudre Canyon as an area they would like to explore, so they decided to reach it via the Big South Trail. They had heard how beautiful and wild the area around the river was, and since that was the main reason Gary and he had become interested in hiking, they thought it would be worth visiting. While they were hiking, Rob and Gareth ended up in a rock field and decided to climb about 2,000 feet to the top. "It's remarkable country up there, but it was really a struggle," Gareth later said. "You constantly have to watch your feet, focusing on the area in front of you so you don't twist an ankle or something like that." Both had hiked in nearby areas before and were aware of the Jared Atadero mystery due to the amount of media attention it had received. As experienced hikers, they had theorized on one or two occasions about the cause of the child's disappearance. "We assumed he had been swept downriver and possibly taken by a mountain lion," Rob said. "Obviously, there was the possibility that something more sinister had happened, but it wasn't something we really talked about. Having kids of our own, it just wasn't something we wanted to think about." But given that they were hiking in the same area where Jared had disappeared, the pair felt an unsettling sense of dread and couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious and disturbing incident. However, neither of them expected the discovery they were about to make that day. Rob and Gareth generally stuck to popular trails mainly for safety reasons, but on that first visit to the Big South Trail, with the thought of Jared's disappearance on their minds, they decided to venture off the beaten path. "We didn't go out with the intention of finding something," Gareth added. "We assumed that if a full team of people couldn't find anything, there was no way we could. But I guess there was an element of, what if? And then, about an hour into the hike, we just stumbled upon it. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing." Somehow, Rob and Gareth had stumbled upon a set of children's clothing more than 500 feet from the trail where Jared was last seen. "That's when I saw the shoe," Gareth said. "It was definitely a child's shoe, and it was pristine, like someone had just pulled their foot out of it, Fresh. Like you could look up and see a kid hopping around looking for his shoe." But then, the two hiking partners found another matching shoe, a brown fleece jacket and a pair of blue sweatpants that had been turned inside out. In their eyes, there was no way that clothing could belong to Jared Atadero. The child had disappeared nearly 4 years earlier, and it was inconceivable that they had been exposed to the elements all this time and still looked new. However, just in case, the two men took photos of the clothing and called 911 at the first available opportunity. They complied with the detective's request to email the photos they had taken, which were then forwarded to Alan Atadero, who was living in Littleton at the time. The detective was astonished when he received a response affirming that the clothes did indeed belong to Jared. Within 24 hours, state authorities had assembled a team composed of members of the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, Larimer County Search and Rescue Personnel, Colorado Division of Wildlife Rangers, and volunteers from an organization known as NecroSearch. All were directed to meet at the Big South Trail access point to begin searching for Jared's remains. Later, with Alan Atadero and local Child Protection Network staff joining the search effort, they managed to recover the remains of the entire outfit Jared had been wearing the day he disappeared, which were scattered over an area of 26 feet. The fleece jacket appeared to have puncture marks, and the sweatpants were torn, while the nylon shoes showed little wear, leading investigators to conclude that some of the items were sheltered from the elements and others exposed. It was the simplest explanation, but not necessarily the correct one. Then, about 180 feet north and 20 feet higher in elevation from where the clothing was found, police made a chilling discovery. It was a small fragment of a human skull embedded in a crevice and barely visible to the naked eye. Nearby, on a log spanning the crevice where the skull fragment was found, police also found a human tooth. By 5 p.m. that afternoon, Alan Atadero and other members of the search teams gathered the crowds of television news reporters at the trailhead and announced what he and the team had found. It was definitely a breakthrough in the case, but again, the discovery seemed only to raise more questions than it answered, and it wasn't long before people were forced to come up with their own explanations. Canadian adventurer Les Stroud, known as Survivorman, said that what was happening on the Big South Trail was simply beyond human comprehension. In many of these cases, the search and rescue teams or volunteers have already checked certain areas not once, not twice, but even dozens of times, he said. And then the child is found there, maybe a year or even several years later. It doesn't make any sense. I've spent years in the woods and I've seen all kinds of things, but I still can't make sense of it. Rob Osborne suggests that there is a good chance that the area where Jared's clothing was found wasn't searched during the initial effort, and that it was due to one simple thing. There was no way a child could have climbed to that spot on his own. No way. For Gary and me, it was a struggle to get up there. It was very rugged terrain. So maybe the police should have searched that area the first time, but at the same time, I can't blame them for ruling it out. Police dog handler Jane Schmievsky initially concluded that Jared's disappearance was due to an encounter with an animal. I'm not sure what has been officially published as the final conclusion, but everything points to an encounter with an animal. Nothing else explains how he could have been dragged up so high unless, of course, it was a person who took Jared that morning. This is where SAR specialist Bill Nelson's testimony gets a little eerie. If a big cat really did take him, which is what I think happened, it would have taken him somewhere and buried him, he said. With all the activity going on, we probably scared it off. Then it would have come back later to dig up its food. That's why nobody found anything. The child was underground the whole time. But then surely the volunteers or the police would have noticed some disturbed ground somewhere, and Jared's clothing should have shown some signs of an animal attack. It's inconsistencies like these that make Alan Atadero think that something else is responsible for his son's disappearance. I keep hearing about a mountain lion, he said. But when they analyzed Jared's clothing, there was no mountain lion hair, no DNA, no blood, nothing on his clothes. If a mountain lion had attacked him, they would have gone for the stomach area. His jacket would have been torn to shreds, but his jacket was fine. I've talked to wildlife experts about this, said Alan, quick to reassure those listening to him. Jared's jacket wouldn't have survived a mountain lion attack. His shoes, which were found on the mountain according to investigators, don't look like they've been out in the wild for years. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Alan also points out that another interesting thing about the discovery of Jared's almost pristine shoes is that they definitely would have been worn down if he had been dragged down the side of a mountain, as in a mountain lion attack. His sweatpants were found in good condition with only minor damage from rodents and birds that used threads for nesting materials. A large predator would have had to tear the little boy's clothing to feed, but there's no sign that this happened. One of the reports Alan Atadero read stated that the reason forensic examiners found no DNA or blood on Jared's clothing was because he or something had removed his clothing before being attacked. We can only imagine how horrified his father must have felt reading that. It was the last thing he wanted to hear. The report went on to say that because so many hikers were coming up, the mountain lion that took Alan's son then ran off with his body 500 feet from the side of the cliff. However, the question remains. If something took off Jared's clothing before he was attacked, why was it then found about 500 feet down the mountain? His sweatpants were found inside out, a clear indication that they were hastily removed and not by something with claws or teeth. And, as we've said, it's little details like this that make Alan and his family believe that someone out there knows a little more about the case than they're willing to share. Jared's disappearance has never been fully explained by U.S. law enforcement or their amateur counterparts. But it's important for mountain lion theorists to consider that since 1915, there have been a total of 14 reported mountain lion attacks in the United States and Canada that resulted in fatalities. The chances of being attacked by one are extremely low, and even lower when you consider that Jared was part of a large group of hikers. These hikers were intensely interrogated by the police, as it seemed natural that at least one of them was responsible for his disappearance. But multiple homicide detectives said that the interviews with the members of the hiking group showed no obvious red flags, and that no evidence pointed to their guilt. As a result of such speculation, theories seeking to explain such mysterious events have evolved from purely rational possibilities to bizarre conspiracy-like explanations such as attacks by cryptic creatures or alien abductions. But no matter how much people keep throwing out ideas, nothing holds up. And as more and more time passes, it seems increasingly likely that the disappearance of young Jared Atadero will forever remain a heartbreaking yet terrifying mystery.